big tech regulation in Kenya, and I'm just going to classify it as big tech because, in my opinion, you need to think beyond the memes and the dancing challenges that you consume from TikTok.
Yeah.
This is a conversation about so much more.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the decision to ban or not to ban needs to, first, the discussion is a legitimate one to have.
Okay.
We recently, had a ban of WorldCoin. And in my opinion, whatever WorldCoin was doing is not different from what TikTok is doing, from what Facebook is doing. I think the different, and even, yeah, and Odanga will talk about Huduma number, right? So
Yeah.
I think for me, it's time that we stopped playing, the small league when we think about technology, or, where we cower and say, oh, we're a third world country. What business do we have, even pretending like we can ban?
Yeah.
I think, to be very fair, and I'm not for banning TikTok, I don't think that's the solution, and that's my part.
Yeah.
That's not my that's just, my opinion on it. But I think the conversations we need to hear from Parliament need to mature.
Okay.
And to stop being so simplistic.
And I'll ask you to also give a contrast after he gives us a response on the arguments in this case, on whether it's at par with other republics that have brought this up in this kind of way. So Bob Ndolo, in his submission, points out sexual violence promotion, hate speech, vulgarity, undermining the country's moral fabric. As you see this, is there any other way, or do you see it as a watertight case in terms of the petition, based on these cases that have been brought up?
Okay, I mean, the question of moral fabric is always something that is always up for argument,
yeah.
Right? And perhaps sometimes it's not even entirely constitutional, if I'm not wrong, right? When you're trying to think about this issue in this way or form. And then secondly, I mean, it's important to also think about, in terms of the optics,
yeah.
The person who he used to bring that case to the front in terms of the idea of moral fabric was not necessarily the best representation of what we would like to think about moral fabric as, right? Now, does TikTok have a problem with sexual violence? Yes. Does it have a problem with the exposure of said sexual and lewd material to children who are underage? Yes. There's no evidence of that happening necessarily in Kenya, but there is evidence of that happening across very many countries.
Yeah.
Does TikTok have a problem with hate speech? I did the research around that. I would not be surprised if some of the work that we did at Mozilla ends up being used in that specific capacity. But yes, that is research that we have done, identified, and have very clear evidence about. Now, is that just enough reason to go ahead and ban the entire platform? I don't think so, because we would, again, as Neema mentioned, be sort of distracting ourselves from having the discussion we need to have, which is that how do we actually regulate these platforms? How do we hold these platforms to account? Mm-hmm. And how do these platforms end up carrying out the right kind of what we call content moderation on their platforms? Because to be honest, TikTok had this coming. Okay? TikTok had this coming. They have failed terribly at their content moderation principles, and even in terms of managing their own content moderators. Mm-hmm. And, the chickens are basically coming to roost, right? But that's not to say that their bad behavior is not something that we don't see with other tech platforms. Yeah. And therefore, going ahead to ban them is not necessarily going to be the answer. And neither is it going to be, I highly doubt it's also going to be successful.
Okay.
But yeah.
A quick pushback was, we can't ban this. It's bringing employment to our youth who are making money from TikTok. And that's what we heard from some of the Waheshimiwas. Do you see that? And she's mentioned it, we shouldn't just bow down to these big techs in the name of, they're bringing opportunity. Do you see that as firm enough response in defense of TikTok?
So first of all, like anybody who's coming forward and saying that needs to come forward with very solid evidence of where that is showing up, right?
Of money that's
being
made
of the
on
money
TikTok.
that's being made directly to Kenyans as a result of TikTok, as opposed to the money that TikTok makes from Kenya.
Okay,
right?
let's explain that
And
a
you
bit
need to
further.
consider that in terms of the value of either advertising, because TikTok has not yet opened up advertising within the country.
Okay.
But you also need to consider the amount of data that is being extracted from not just Kenyans, but Africans at large, and how that helps TikTok refine its For You page algorithm.
Okay.
Right, which is incredibly valuable to them and enables them to scale across the continent. It's only a matter of time before brands are able to begin buying ads in Kenya, right? It's going to take, they're going to take their time, but that day is coming.
Okay.
Right,
Help me
so
understand. You
it's-
say
yes.
something about what TikTok gets and what it puts into the economy. But many content creators say they're paid thanks to TikTok.
How many?
Isn't it TikTok paying them?
So-
explain it to someone who doesn't.
So your question is about how TikTok
yeah,
is,
because there's that argument of money.
yes,
Their understanding is TikTok gives us money. Like we get a lot of money based on our social
Business,
media
yeah.
Yes.
influencing because of that platform and our following on that platform. And so when you say
But-
that there's what TikTok brings in,
yes.
and in Kenya it's not directly paying, what's the situation? Like
So you're talking about basically what TikTok brings in
Monetizing, yeah.
and-
in terms of monetization
Yes,
of content
yes,
within the Kenyan jurisdiction.
Yes.
Now, that is not a bad thing, right? But if someone was bellowing smoke into your kitchen, but then you're saying, oh, and then you're getting lung cancer, right? But then he says, oh, but you know I'm paying your neighbors,
I'm paying rent.
and I'm paying rent.
Okay.
Yeah. And what else? What else am I doing? Oh yeah, I'm feeding your dog, by the way, right? But you go ahead and get lung cancer. It's fine.
I've built the road. that
I've built the
comes
road
here.
that comes here. Right? You get the analogy that's
I-
coming
I
here.
do.
This is a very
this analogy
it's a
is
very
really close.
neoliberal argument.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far into that, but it's a very neoliberal argument where we think that, you know, economic arguments, right, go above
Justify.
yeah, exactly, go above the safety and consumer protection obligations that many of these companies have.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can speak to that as well, the economic argument. But there's something you mentioned earlier that you've witnessed and followed such cases in other jurisdictions. But the parliamentarians, or at least the lawmakers, have gone deeper in their argument, have involved other stakeholders in getting to the bottom of this.
Let me start with the point Odanga ended on. You know, the neoliberalism, you know, and introduce a concept called the algorithmic marketplace of ideas. So we are all familiar with, you know, freedom of speech, and freedom of speech is built on the theory of the marketplace of ideas, where if we all have freedom of speech, then the weaker arguments will naturally die off, while the stronger ones are going to be accepted by society as truth. But the problem is, in this age we're in, algorithms actually interfere with that marketplace of ideas, where your idea, you might produce very good content on this platform. Who determines whether it goes viral or not? It's never a straight formula to say, if I have good content, keep it to this duration, air it at this time when there's peak performance. You can do everything right. It still doesn't guarantee the viralability. And that's where, in the cases we've observed, you know, in our courts, some of these platforms, such as Meta, are being challenged on the algorithms, where they promote, you know, sexual content, violent content, civil war content, you know, hate speech, over natural content. And in the marketplace of ideas, you're going to be grooming a generation that actually accepts as truth some of the dangerous content. So that's part of where I want to answer your question from. What we need to see our legislators, our regulators doing is coming up with research, with NIS reports of, we have studied this, and this from a Kenyan perspective, this is what we're seeing as the risks and the dangers. This is where harm is, you know, this is where the risk to harm is happening from an angle of, you know, TikTok targeting teenagers with this particular content.
Gotcha.
We need to stop, with this faith diplomacy and religiosity where, one day we wake up, it's a Sunday, and someone, reported that there was sexual content last night, and you have this holy rage, and you decide to push forward with the regulation because you know what? It works to the platforms.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, it's very easy for TikTok to just discontinue all those platforms that have brought up this issue. Will you have solved the problem?
No.
You won't have solved the bigger problem, but they can afford to sacrifice a few influencers.
Yeah.
But guess what? They still own the content these influencers put up.
Yeah.
They own information and data. They've been tracking everyone who's been tuning to their platforms. There's no loss for them. So for the influencer, there'll be loss of business because they are marketing. And you know that, and just to answer the question you asked, Odanga, we should stop over celebrating these platforms because if you are making money because you have 400,000 followers, that's your pure, solid hard work. Your content, you have marketed yourself,
Yeah.
you have actually used your talents
Gosh.
to bring that following, to some extent. There's a tiny extent where the algorithm chooses to favor you over Odanga because either this one is darker or lighter or whatever. And now that's where we need to regulate because TikTok has never disclosed anything about its algorithm. We also don't know
They
too
don't
much
know how it
about.
works.
Is it obligated
Yeah,
to?
but the problem is, TikTok doesn't need you to own a TikTok account to get your data.
Yeah.
If someone in your household has a TikTok platform, your information is already being gathered. There are up to close to 30,000 apps that are volunteering your data to TikTok. For instance, Canva, which is used widely by, content developers, So a lot of the regulation discussion needs to graduate and stop being on who is playing what content at midnight to what is TikTok, the whole universe of how TikTok is gathering this information, what they're using it for, and who else has access to it. And to be honest, when they have that conversation, they'll bring bigger names than you can imagine. They'll bring Microsoft, they'll bring Oracle, they'll bring Google to the table because they're all benefiting from TikTok's gathering of information.